Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to tell you and give you the tips for the second reading passage, Academic IELTS. Today's passage is called The Pirates of the Ancient Mediterranean. Okay, so let's start with the tips and the steps. So once you sit at your test and you receive your paper, when we talk about the paper-based IELTS test, you have to read first the heading. In our case, this is the heading, The Pirates of the Ancient Mediterranean. After the heading goes subheading, and after reading heading, we don't have any clue what the text is going to be about. Okay, so just reading the heading, the topic is kind of general, but after reading the subheading, we already understand what is the passage going to talk about. And the passage says, in the first and second millennia BCE, pirates sailed around the Mediterranean, attacking ships and avoiding pursuers. So after reading the subheading, I have a much clearer idea of what the passage is going to talk about. Okay, so the next step is to look through the structure of the passage. As you can see, this kind of passage is divided into other paragraphs, and we can see there are the letters of the alphabet in front of each paragraph. So let's have a look. How many paragraphs are there? Okay, so this is another page. Okay, so there are 7 paragraphs. The next step is to get familiar with the questions. Okay, so let's have a look at the questions 14 to 19. And before you read the questions, always read the task. What does the task need from you? Which paragraph contains the following information? So all the letters from the paragraph from A to G, you have to write in boxes in front of the numbers 14 to 19 in your answer sheet. Okay, so let's have a look at all the statements here. Okay, so question 14, a reference to a denial of involvement in piracy. Okay, so when you read these statements, read or try to think of any synonyms here. Okay, so the word a reference, a synonym to the word can be is mentioning. Okay, so knowing and trying to paraphrase these sentences or trying to find the synonyms will help you to find the information in the text much quicker. A reference to a denial of involvement in piracy. Statement 15, details of how a campaign to eradicate piracy was carried out. Okay, so here's the word to eradicate. And let's think of a synonym to this word. So the word to eradicate can be to eliminate. Okay, so this is one of the synonyms to this word. 16. A mention of the circumstances in which states in the ancient world would make use of pirates. So this sentence basically says how the ancient countries and empires like Roman Empire, kingdoms were using the pirates, okay, for when and in under what circumstances they could use their services. 17, a reference of how people today commonly view pirates. 18, an explanation of how some people were encouraged not to return to piracy. 19, a mention of the need for many sailing vessels to stay relatively close to land. Okay, let's have a look at the next questions. Questions 20 to 21. Which two of the following statements does the writer make about inhabitants of the Mediterranean region in the ancient world? Okay, so you have to choose only two answers for question 20 and question 21. Who are the inhabitants? Inhabitants are the people or animals that live in a particular place. Okay, A. They often used stolen vessels to carry out pirate attacks. They managed to escape capture by the authorities because they knew the area so well. C. They paid for information about the routes merchant ships would take. D. They depended more on the sea for their livelihood than on farming. E. They stored many of the goods taken in pirate attacks in coves along the coastline. Questions 23 to 22 23. Again, you have to choose only two letters from A to E. Which of the following statements does the writer make about the piracy in ancient Greece? A. The state estimated that very few people were involved in piracy. B. Attitudes towards piracy changed shortly after the Iliad and the Odyssey were written. C. Important officials were known to occasionally take part in piracy. D. Every citizen regarded pirate attacks on cities as unacceptable. E. A favorable view of piracy is evident in certain ancient Greek texts. And the last task, the summary type task question says, complete the summary below. You have to choose one word only from the passage for each answer. Okay, so you have to remember, if the task says to choose only one word, you have to choose only one word. Do not write two or three words or one word with number. Only one word. Okay, so this is a short summary of some of the paragraph, not the whole passage. Ancient Rome and piracy. Piracy was an issue ancient Rome had to deal with, but it also brought some benefits for Rome. For example, pirates supplied slaves that were imported for Rome's industries. However, attacks on vessels transporting something to Rome resulted in calls for something for the pirates responsible. Nevertheless, piracy continued, with some pirates demanding something for the return of the Roman officials they captured. Okay, so the next step, of course, is to read the whole passage. You have to be able to read it in 4 or 5 minutes, well, maximum 6 minutes, not more. And here's a tip for you in case you are a slow reader or it's difficult for you to read academic tests. Before taking the test, before sitting in the room, please give yourself time to practice at least 3 months to read academic texts in order to get used to them, because these texts are very difficult and you have to build up your vocabulary. Okay, so now I am not going to read it here with you together, so you just only pause the screen and read the passages, okay? And then we will be working on answering the questions. Okay, so let's get started with answering the questions. So the question 14 was a reference to a denial of involvement in piracy. You can start answering your questions either by reading your questions. For example, you go to question 14 and you read about it after reading the whole passage, or you can answer the questions while reading the paragraph. Personally, for me, it was easier to answer the questions when after reading the paragraph. So let's start answering with paragraphs. So paragraph A. Do you remember what does this paragraph say? What does it tell you about? So in the first paragraph, the information about the pirates is general, right? It's a kind of introduction to the topic. So there is nothing specific about it. However, in question 17, it asks a reference to how people today commonly view pirates. And here's in this paragraph, the first sentence is the answer to the question 17. When one mentions pirates, an image springs to most people's minds of a crew of misfits, daredevils, and adventurers in command of a tall sailing ship in the Caribbean Sea. Okay, so this sentence says, how do people see pirates nowadays? Okay, so I go back to these questions and I remember that there was a question here. Question 17, right? Question 17 asked us, how do people view the pirates nowadays? Okay, so I definitely know that it's A. Okay, paragraph B. What does this paragraph tell? What is written here? Okay, so if we talk about this paragraph, we can say that this paragraph was talking about the Mediterranean region, why people who lived there decided to turn into piracy, which year, and where, from which country did it start, okay, and what kind of knowledge they knew, and so on and so forth. And here, in the end, almost in the end, we saw these sentences. Okay, geography itself further benefited the pirates, with the numerous coves along the coast providing places for them to hide their boats and strike undetected. Before the invention of ocean-going caravels in the 15th century, ships could not easily cross the distances over open water. Thus, in the ancient world, most were restricted to a few well-known navigable routes that followed the coastline. Okay, so here's these three sentences, especially this last sentence, says that because the ships couldn't be maneuvered very well because they were heavy, because of carrying different kind of goods, it wasn't easy to maneuver them in open waters. So the ships, merchant ships, were supposed to be close to land. And now I know that the word coastline is the synonym to the word land, which was in the question 19. Okay, so question 19. A mention of the need for many sailing vessels to stay relatively close to land. Okay, so I saw this information in paragraph B and I am writing it without hesitation. Paragraph B mentioned this information. Okay, so now the paragraph C, the shortest paragraph. This paragraph tells us about the reasons why some governments, or we can say countries or states or like empires, the reasons for them why they could employ pirates. Okay, and here it says that this sentence gives us all this information here. One should also add that it was not unknown in the first and second millennia BCE for governments to resort to pirate services, especially during wartime, employing their skills and numbers against their opponents. Okay, and further you can see that pirates ships or pirate fleet would usually be the first to attack, preparing the way for the navy, for the rest of the ships. And I remember there was a question about it, a mentioning of the circumstances in which the pirates were employed. Okay, so here I remember there was a question somewhere here, question 16. A mention of the circumstances in which states in the ancient world would make use of pirates. Well, you have to see if you noticed, and you have to notice that in this text the word states is used, but in the paragraph there was a word governments used. Now in the paragraph D of it says that ancient Egyptians had a different kind of experience, and the first the first mention of pirates was mentioned in the Amarna letters. This is the first time that pirates were mentioned, and an Egyptian pharaoh wrote a letter to the king of Alashia, which is located now in the modern Cyprus, accusing him of his people being involved in piracy. But the king of Alashia denied any involvement. He rejected Egyptian king's claims of connection with the Luca. This was the group of pirates named as the Luca. So the king rejected Pharaoh's claims being connected or involved in piracy. Okay, so I remember there was a paragraph, there was a sentence that said that someone, or there is a reference of a denial of involvement in piracy. Okay, so I remember this question, a reference to a denial of involvement in piracy. Okay, so I am definitely sure now that this is the correct answer. Now, paragraph E contains a very interesting information. Here it describes the ancient Greeks' experience with the pirates. And in this paragraph, there was mentioning of these two works, the Iliad and the Odyssey by the ancient Greek writer Homer. And this says that ancient Greeks not only they praised and glorified pirates' lifestyle, and even high-ranking members of the state were engaged in piracy. There was one Greek ambassador who made a detour from his official trip. He went to capture an Egyptian ship with different kind of goods, and he robbed and stole and took all the goods from the Egyptian ship. So it was for them, for the ancient Greeks, this was the norm in their life. So let's see, is there any mentioning of anything like that in the questions 14 to 19? Okay, so there are two questions that remain unanswered, and let's read them to see if there are any mentioning about the Greeks' experience with the pirates. So, question 15, details of how a campaign to eradicate piracy was carried out. Okay, so that paragraph didn't contain any information about any plan how to eliminate, eradicate, or wipe out piracy. Okay, there is no information at all. Question 18, an explanation of how some people were encouraged not to return to piracy. And again, in that paragraph, paragraph E, there was no any mention in how the pirates were encouraged by the governments not to go to piracy, not to start these evil actions again. So in this case, we don't have the answer for paragraph E. We cannot write it anywhere because there is no any question about it. Okay, so let's read the rest of the paragraphs. Okay, so the paragraph F starts mentioning about eradicating or eliminating the piracy. Um, so Okay, so here this paragraph talks about Roman Empire being attacked by the pirates, and it was kind of leading to the next paragraph telling about the plan that they needed to stop the piracy. So in the paragraph F, there is still no information about the plan, how Roman Empire decided to eradicate piracy. So in the paragraph G, there are two sentences that are the answers to the last questions, question 15 and question 18. So for the question 18, it says here, in 67 BCE, a new law granted Pompey vast funds to combat the Mediterranean menace. Taking personal command, Pompey divided the entire Mediterranean into 13 districts, assigning a fleet and commander to each. Okay, so this is a plan how this was a plan how to eradicate or campaign for eradicating piracy. Okay, how it was carried out. And the last sentence here. Instead of a maritime menace, Rome got productive farmers that further boosted economy. Okay, even the previous sentence. Although thousands of pirates died at the hands of Pompey troops, as a long-term solution to the problem, many more were offered land in fertile areas located far from the sea. Okay, so these two last sentences answer our question 18, where it says that many pirates were offered land, and the governments this way turned them into farmers. Okay, so question 15. Details of how a campaign to eradicate piracy was carried out. So we read about this information in paragraph G. Also, we read about this an explanation of how some people were encouraged not to return to piracy. We read about that here in this paragraph as well. So it often happens in the IELTS test that there are some questions can be in one paragraph. So you can use the letter A to G, any letters, even more than once, even twice. Okay, so you see here, you've got this information. You may use any letter more than once. Okay, so please remember this information. Okay, so let's read the next questions. Questions 20 to 21. Remember, you have to choose two letters from A to E. Which two of the following statements does the writer make about inhabitants of the Mediterranean region in the ancient world? Okay, so let's try to think about the correct. Let's think of the correct answers. A. They often used stolen vessels to carry out pirate attacks. No, now I remember that there was something mentioning that they used to steal goods, but it doesn't say anything. There is no information in the paragraph that the pirates used stolen vessels to carry out pirate attacks. No, they had their own boats, but they didn't use any stolen ones. B. They managed to escape capture by the authorities because they knew the area very well. Okay, so do you remember the information when it was said that they knew that the pirates in the Mediterranean, I mean the inhabitants of the Mediterranean region, possessed seafaring skills. They were skillful at sea and they knew all the ways, all the routes. Right? So if you are not sure, you can go back to paragraph B. Okay, C. They paid information about the routes merchant ships would take. Okay, so there was no any information about paying to someone, right? Nobody paid for the pirates for the information about the routes that merchant ships would take. All right, there is no information at all about it. They depended more on the sea for their livelihood than on farming. Again, I remember the same sentence in the paragraph B, where it was said that they possess seafaring skills. It was said that they relied on the seafood more than on farming. Okay, so this is the correct answer. And the last one, they stored many of the goods taken in pirate attacks in coves along the coastline. Okay, so was information about their boats, that they were hiding their boats in the coves, but not storing all the food, all the goods, what they used to take. Okay, so if you are not sure about all the answers, you can go back to the paragraph B, reread it, and then you will be sure about the answers. Okay, so let's move on to the next questions. So questions 22 to 23. Which of the following statements does the writer make about piracy and ancient Greece? A. The state estimated that very few people were involved in piracy. So do you remember that paragraph, paragraph F, if I'm not mistaken, or E? Paragraph E. Sorry, it was in paragraph E, not F. Then it was said that ancient Greeks even praised and glorified pirates' lifestyle. Even famous people with high ranks used to do raids and steal from other ships. Okay, so this statement is false. It does not correspond to the information because the word few, right? If this word was different, we would choose this one as the correct one. B. Attitudes towards piracy changed shortly after the Iliad and the Odyssey were written. Okay, so now I remember there was information mentioning Homer's works, the Iliad and the Odyssey, but there is no information that people's attitudes towards pirates changed after these books were written. Okay, it was, I would say, even quite the opposite. So I would say that this information is false as well. C. Important officials were known to occasionally take part in piracy. Okay, this answer is definitely true. Remember, I mentioned it. Remember that when I told that the paragraph E contained the information and it told that high ranking officials also used to do raids on different kind of ships. And there was even one ambassador who attacked Egyptian ship. D. Every citizen regarded pirate attacks on cities as unacceptable. Well, this one you already should choose as incorrect one, right? So you already should cross it out. Why? Remember when I said that ancient Greeks glorified and praised pirates? So no. And the only one variant which is left is E, and I am 100% sure that this is the correct answer. A favorable view of piracy is evident in certain ancient Greek texts. Again, I will repeat you that in the Iliad and the Odyssey, the Homer praised and glorified the piracy lifestyle. Okay, so let's move on to the last question. So the last questions are the summary of a small paragraph, ancient Rome and piracy. Okay, so let's read it together and try to write in the words. Piracy was an issue ancient Rome had to deal with, but it also brought some benefits for Rome. For example, pirates supplied slaves that were imported for Rome's industries. However, attacks on vessels transporting grain to Rome resulted in calls for punishment. For the pirates responsible. Nevertheless, piracy continued, with some pirates demanding a ransom for the return of the Roman officials they captured. Okay, so I am going to show you where you can find this information. It was in the paragraph which talked about capturing the Julius Caesar. It was the paragraph F. Okay, let me show it to you. Okay, so here it is, it says, okay, so pirate attacks on grain ships, which were essential to Roman citizens, led to angry voices in the Senate demanding punishment of the culprits. Rome, however, did nothing further encouraging piracy. By the 1st century BCE, emboldened pirates kidnapped prominent Roman dignitaries asking for a large ransom to be paid. Okay, so here is the word grain ships. Of course, in the paragraph and the paraphrase, in the summary, that it was paraphrased. Of course, you have to remember, if you have a summary completion task, please bear in mind that sentences in the summary will be not the same as in the text. All of these sentences will be paraphrased. So you have to be extra careful and read questions, and you have to use your logical thinking for these kind of questions. Okay, so however, attacks on vessels transporting grain to Rome resulted in calls for punishment. Okay, so this one sentence was paraphrased a little bit in the summary. Okay, I've just read the summary, please don't be surprised about it. And so here there was just only grain ships. Then there were angry people in the Senate who demanded punishment of the culprits. Culprits is the other word of saying bad people, or bad people. That it's another word of calling the pirates. Then Rome, however, did nothing further encouraging piracy. Then this sentence says that once they captured a very famous person and they asked for a large ransom. Ransom is a large sum of money that pirates asked for people that they captured. And there was even one famous person who was captured, Julius Caesar. Okay, so these were the last questions. This was the last task. If you have any comments, questions, anything that you don't understand, please write in the comment section below. Let me know if you need some further explanation. So have a nice day. See you next time. Bye.